Hey guys, and welcome to the Tap and Go podcast, where we talk all things rugby with players, coaches, and pundits from across the world. Today, we are very lucky to have one of the most experienced players in the modern game. He's captained the Queensland Reds to a Super Rugby Premiership, captained the Wallabies to a bronze medal in the 2011 World Cup, and most recently captained Harlequins in the English Premiership. Welcome, James Horwill. How are you, James?
Good, guys. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having us. It's good to be here.
Perfect. So just how have you found quarantine at the moment? That's obviously we're all still stuck in it.
Yeah, it's all right. It's I've been quite busy with work and university stuff, so it's been okay, although it's challenging. I've got a little 18-month-old daughter, so trying to keep her entertained with not going out to parks and stuff has been interesting. But the nice weather has helped a little bit, and a lot of green space up here in Cambridge, so that always helps. But yeah, look, it's hopefully we can see the other side of it soon. And yeah, as I was mentioning before, I'm a bit jealous of everyone back home in Oz, as they're sort of coming. They're well and truly through the other side of this and getting back to a lot of normality. Yeah, so not going too bad, all things considered.
Yeah, sure. So you broke onto the Super Rugby scene quite early in 2006, and then became the Reds captain in 2008 and Wallabies in 2011. What was it like, sort of, I guess, going headfirst into all these like impressive sort of teams at such a young age?
Yeah, look, I guess I was quite lucky. My timing, breaking onto, I guess, the professional scene, I was quite lucky that, well, lucky in a way, the Western Force in Australia came on as our fourth Super Rugby team. And as a result of that, a lot of current and incumbent Queensland players left to go and play for the Western Force. The guys like Nathan Sharp is probably the best example that most people here would know, and so there was quite a big hole, particularly in the forward pack, as a lot of our forwards all went to the Western Force, to the opposition. So it presented me with an opportunity to start playing. So yeah, it probably came earlier than I was expecting, but it was sort of one of those things that you didn't want to let the opportunity slip. And you're always told as a kid, in sport or whatever it is, just be ready for your opportunity whenever it comes, and make sure you grab it with both hands, because sometimes you don't get a second one. And certainly that was the approach I took, and I was very lucky that things fell my way, and I got a lot more opportunity probably to play than I might have had of these players not left and gone elsewhere.
So obviously, any kid's dreams to captain their country at professional level. I was wondering whether you could give us a little bit of insight into how that came about. Did you get a phone call? Was it a meeting? Did you have any idea?
No, I didn't have any idea. It was a bit of a weird one. So it was during our the Tri Nations at that time. So this is pre-Rugby Championship. We played it was the World Cup year, so we had a shortened Tri Nations, and we just played South Africa in Durban, and we'd won quite well, which was a big thing. Tough place to win in South Africa. And we knew we were coming home to play the All Blacks for a decider for the Tri Nations, and we'd stayed in South Africa for an extra couple of days. And just after a team meeting, Robbie Deans, who was Wallabies coach at the time, asked me to stay behind, and basically just told me then and there that was the what was happening. Rocky Elsom, who was the incumbent skipper at the time, had already been informed, and moving forward, that was what's going to happen leading into the following weekend, and then obviously into the World Cup. So yeah, huge surprise. Wasn't sort of something that was on my radar. I mean, I'd been captaining the Reds for probably 3 or 4 years prior to that, and look, it was as you said, a huge honour. I was very lucky to play my first test as skipper at home, and my home stadium in Brisbane, which is always which was huge for me and my family, and we ended up winning the Tri Nations that game. So that I was very lucky that sort of fell into place for me, and yeah, it was huge. And probably surprise was the biggest word, and not something that I probably ever went out expecting, or yeah. So it was a enjoyable experience, and yeah, into the World Cup was certainly a learning curve, but yeah, something I thoroughly enjoyed.
Yeah, So I guess on that 2011 Super Rugby season, so you had you won it, and you had players like Will Genia, Quade Cooper, Digby Ioane, who I guess who all brought their own flair. Like looking at some of the tries are just outrageous, and I guess some of the try celebrations are pretty impressive. What was it like being on such a successful and like fun team? I guess I bet it was enjoyable to play.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head. The enjoyment that we had, I think the big thing, obviously at the Reds, previous to that, probably when I started out, those next couple of years, we had some real lows. We weren't very successful, but a lot of that team had sort of come together end of 07, 08, maybe even 09, sort of came in and sort of from a young age, I'm probably a little bit at the older edge of those players, but a lot of the younger guys, the Wills, the Quades, these guys had played junior rugby together through schoolboy levels, and played against each other, through the underage groups, and so there was already a connection and a camaraderie that we'd already had in the team, and I think that was the big thing that built us moving forward. Is that there was a great mateship amongst the group and the connection, and we enjoyed what we did. We trained hard, we worked very hard, but we enjoyed ourselves away from rugby. We enjoyed spending time together as a team on tour. When training finished, we all, guys went out for dinner. We spent a lot of time at each other's places. I think there was a real connection, and probably one of the most sort of aligned groups that I've ever played with as a team, and that was always something that I think held us in good stead when the times got tough. And we had a lot of, as you touched on, guys with amazing talent, amazing rugby players, but there's also a bunch of guys that probably don't get the kudos. That these are the guys that sort of the glue that holds your team together. They might not start every week, they might not play every game, but as a squad player, we had a lot of guys like that were great for us and really allowed the players like your Quades and your Wills and your Digby's to do what they do best. And when it comes off, as you said, there weren't any better in the game at that time than those guys working together.
And do you think that was the same with the Australian side? So going to obviously 2011 World Cup, got the bronze medal. It's probably quite successful going to New Zealand. Is that the same with the Australian side?
Oh, I think yes. I think to an element, I think we would have liked to have done better. We obviously dropped the game against Ireland in the pool matches, which was we were caught on the hop, and that we just went up to the races, and Ireland played better than we were, which put us onto the other side of the draw. So we had to go through South Africa and New Zealand to get to the final to win it. That was what we knew, and looking back, we knew that we could beat both those teams because we'd done it, within a couple of months before. So there was no doubt in our mind. But I think the game against South Africa in Wellington, which was a bit of an arm wrestle, probably took a lot out of us emotionally and physically as well. And then going into that game at Eden Park against the All Blacks, still for me, it's probably the best game that I've played against, that I've had New Zealand play against us. They didn't allow us to play at all. And even though there's been bigger score lines in games against New Zealand, that to me, that felt like the best that they've played. And to be honest, when you look at how the final, they probably played their final in the semi, maybe even like England did against New Zealand in the World Cup just gone. They played their best game, but New Zealand were just good enough to get by France, when they weren't playing well. And England, South Africa in this latest World Cup were too good for England when they weren't on their game. So, look, I think while finishing third was great and it was an experience, we went there to win it. We had the Australian public expected us to win it, and so while it was fantastic in probably my mind, it wasn't a success. We would have liked to get to the final, and then it's down to a 2-horse race. So we probably rued playing that Irish game and dropping that, which would have put us on the path with Wales and arguably France in the quarters and semis if we made it that far.
What was it like sort of playing in Eden Park? Because it's definitely a fortress for the All Blacks at the moment. Like, what made it so special?
Look, I don't know. It's a weird one because it's not like a ground where, some of the South African grounds where they feel like they're on top of you. The stands are very steep. It's all very close. There's a lot of people very close to the pitch. You know, they play cricket at Eden Park, so there's parts of the ground that are quite a long way. The first row is quite a long way from the sideline. So I don't know. I think it's just more the impact that that it has on them as a team. They seem to play better there. And if it was probably, it's just quite a dark place, Eden Park. You know, everywhere you go when you play there, particularly when we play Australia, everyone in the crowd wears black. So when you look into the grandstand, sometimes when you play, particularly because we play night games traditionally in New Zealand due to TV, you know, it's obviously dark outside. You look into the grandstand, everyone's wearing black. There's no colour. So it just feels like a very dark, you know, almost intimidating to an element, but not as probably intimidating as some of the places like your Ellis Parks, your Loftus, these sort of places where they're right on top of you screaming and yelling. So look, it's I just think it's the impact it has on the individuals. You know, the drive into the stadium, you go through and pass all the bars in leading up into Eden Park, and you know, everyone's in an All Blacks jersey or wearing black. There's no colour, and there's only ever a tiny little spot where there was Wallabies fans of a couple of hundred that had gone over and worn their gold.
So obviously, moving on a couple of years, you captained the Wallabies against the Lions, and they came to tour.
Yep.
What was that like? So obviously, the Lions is a massive thing in rugby, and any team playing them is greatly lucky to play against them.
Yeah, look, it's a huge moment for Australian rugby. I think a lot of people might not appreciate the complexity of the Australian sporting landscape with the amount of teams and sports, and you know, we're only a country of 25 million people, so we don't have a huge population. You know, we're the only country in the world with 3 full contact football codes that play at the same time of year on the same TV screens on the same stadium. So it is a very congested landscape, sporting landscape in Australia, and I think rugby had probably suffered a little bit in leading into that. We hadn't been as successful as we probably wanted to be, sort of late 90s, early 2000s, where we'd hosted a World Cup, made it to a final, won Bledisloe's, won a World Cup in 99. So we were obviously still riding a bit on the high of that in the early 2000s. And we dipped away a bit, although we'd had some success from a Super Rugby level with, you know, the Brumbies, the Reds, and in 2014, the Waratahs. But I think from a national level, we'd probably not hit the highs that the public had probably expected, and the Lions turning up is a huge occasion. You know, it put rugby on the front and back pages of all the national newspapers for the 6 weeks they were there, and that's a unique thing for rugby, particularly at that time of year, sort of the June-July window where you know, it's peak rugby league AFL season. So look, it was a huge moment. I think the travelling fans make the Lions very special. The noise they bring, and I think it brought the best out of our fans in Australia. Traditionally, rugby fans in Oz are probably a little bit reserved in the way that they support their team, and you know, still to this day, the national anthem in the game against the first test was the loudest I'd ever heard from any Australian crowd ever, and I think that was a special moment. You know, the result aside, for the tour, I think it did something for rugby that I hadn't seen since I was playing.
And so in the first test, obviously there was the incident where you allegedly stamped on Alan Jones. Moving the incident aside, what sort of impact did it have? So you were under investigation for a while, and then cleared all the charges. What sort of impact does that have on you personally, and then as a squad as well?
Oh, look, it was a bit of a weird situation. You know, I had no idea what had happened, and then I get a phone call at sort of 6 a.m. in the morning saying, I've been cited. I've got to go to we've got a hearing in Melbourne that night when we flew in. So obviously that all sort of hit. We'd lost the test, had to save the series that week. So look, it was an interesting time. You know, I'd be lying if it didn't take a personal impact on me during that period, but just from the fact that it was there was an emotional toll, and you know, when you get accused of doing something you know you didn't do, then and no one believed you, then it's you know, you got to work extra hard to make sure you prove that what had happened. And look, the incident was the incident. I'm I'm one of those guys that sort of believes that, everyone was in their right to do what happened. I'm not sort of holding anything against that, but it was just, there was a lot of emotion built up into that. You fight very hard to clear your name, it gets cleared, and then there's you sort of feel there's an element of the, bowing to a bit of pressure from external factors that make it, reappear. And the fact that we couldn't get that done before the second test was a bit frustrating from my end. So look, it added to the spectacle. And you look at all Lions tours that have gone by, there's always an incident. Skulkberger in 09, Tanu Munga would have been in 03. Oh, sorry, not 03, 05. Sonny Williams in, 17. So there's always something. My name's now put into that list of the 2013 Lions series sort of the incident that happened. So look, I tried very hard to make sure it didn't become a distraction for the rest of the team, and that was probably one of the more difficult things, that you couldn't probably externally show your true feelings, and that's probably why the outpouring of emotion post the second test when we won, in sort of very tight circumstances, similar to the first test, but shoe was on the other foot, sort of thing. So that was probably, I struggled to maintain my composure there, and that was just a build up of what I'd probably internalized all week, and probably not that healthy looking back on it. I should have probably found some more people to speak to about it, and from a mental health point of view. But look, it is, in the end, the series worked out the way it did, and we didn't deserve to win that last test. It's simple as that. That's probably the one game of my career I'd like to have back again. The rest I can, but we just didn't. We just weren't at the races, and that, that's sport. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and we didn't deserve to win that last test. So ultimately, that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Yeah. So in 2013, I guess with the Wallabies, there were a few sort of off-field incidents, which I guess the press called it the three amigos, like Quay Cooper, James O'Connor, and Curtly Beale. As a captain, how did you reduce sort of the impact of these off-field incidents on the team?
Yeah, I guess, look, there was some that, were blown up, and anything that those three guys sort of tried to do was probably magnified greater by, for whatever reason it was. And look, it was, Quade wasn't involved in the Lions series. He wasn't in the squad. He was in the squad later in the year, but he wasn't part of the squad. But, I think we're talking about maybe the incident where James and Curtly went out midweek and got photographed by a Lions fan in a McDonald's. So look, it's one of those things that, look, you've just got to manage the individuals and understand that I was always a big person and still am. You got to allow people to be themselves. You don't want to allow people to be robots. And I was of the belief that as long as you front it up and put the team first for training, and we're ready to go to the best of your ability come training, come game time, then what you do in your own time is your own business. And I think you go down a very slippery slope if you start telling people what they can and can't do. The main thing is you've got to be ready to train. You've got to be prepared to perform at the top of your ability. And if that is, for different people, it might be going to bed at 1 o'clock. For other people, it might be going to bed at 8 o'clock. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what time you should go to bed. I'm not your mother. I'm not your father. It's about, you're part of the team. And if that doesn't work, then, if you don't keep performing, we're in a performance industry and you get found out pretty quick. So look, I think the big thing was that to make people understand that in your team is to understand what the common goal is and understand why we're doing it. And then you allow people to do what they feel needs to perform best. And sometimes it's about managing that earlier than later. And, incidents happen. It's about managing and moving forward and realizing that the team is the most important thing. Individuals come and go. The team is the ultimate goal, and we need to make sure we do whatever's right for the team.
Just out of interest, under your captaincy, were there any times or instances in particular where you thought, right, that's just not on, that player's done something which he just can't do? It was just so...
Let me think. there definitely was probably some I can't speak about on camera. That that probably isn't known public knowledge, and probably keep it. But look, I think understand the teams that when you're part of and people understand, people make mistakes, and I think we can't pretend that everyone's perfect. I'm certainly not perfect, and you guys, I'm sure, aren't perfect. People make mistakes, and it's about understanding why they made a mistake and hope they don't do it again. Now, if people continue to do the same thing all the time, that's when I think there's an issue. If people make one-off mistake, whether it's you're late to training, so you slept in, you miss your alarm, whatever it is, like that's a very minor thing. But I think there's an element of understanding the mistake and helping educate moving forward. But it's when it becomes a habit is the issue and that's when things need to be addressed. So, look, nobody's perfect. Mistakes happen. It's about showing, contrition about what has happened, and you can tell that usually pretty quickly when incidents happen. If there's a contrition and an element that they're genuine about it, then it's different to when there's people that fight and argue and tell you that what they did was right and they should have. It's all so look, it's one of those things, and yeah, certainly there's elements, and it becomes a challenge of being in leadership, but it's something that you need to deal with and make sure that it's always, as I said again, the team is the most important thing when it comes to sport.
Yeah. So I guess moving on, so talking about your move to England recently, what would you say is the biggest difference between the Super Rugby and Premiership, and which one would you say, I guess, is of a higher standard or more difficult to play?
They're quite different. I mean, I think the main difference is the genuine speed, and that's not the speed of Super Rugby is is much faster. The game is played at a higher pace, but the attritional element of the Premiership is much higher. So in terms of games played, speed, collisions, number of tackles, particularly as a tight forward, you're expected to do a lot of heavy lifting, and probably more so than you would at a Super Rugby level. Now, there's a lot of elements that come into that. I think one of the big ones is certainly the weather. Through the periods of from say November to March, it's not conducive to running rugby, and probably it's become a little bit better because the pitches have improved. But when I first moved over here, some of the pitches, the quality just didn't allow it to happen. It was slow, they were heavy, they were boggy when you're playing. It's been raining, you haven't seen sun for 3 weeks, and it's been raining pretty much every day, then the pitch becomes heavy. Now there's a lot more investment into pitches. If you're playing on Twickenham every week, and it's you probably would see a bit more of an expansive game just to the quality of the pitch and the protection a little bit from the elements. So I think it's very hard to compare them, one for one. The speed and the I guess the mentality of Super Rugby is to play with ball in hand, and I think one of the big things I've noticed in Super Rugby was that everyone played differently. So you'd play the Kiwi sides, they'd play a certain way. You'd play the Australian sides, they'd play a certain way. You play the South Africans, and they'd play a different way again. Whereas in the UK, traditionally, everyone sort of plays the same style of game. There's teams that play a bit different. Bristol recently are running it a lot more, but most teams would, you got a fair idea what you're going to get. They got to line out 5 meters out from their own line. 9 times out of 10, they're going to maul it and look for a pen and then box kick. Simple. Playing against a New Zealand side, and they've got to line out 5 meters out. They're probably not going to maul it. They're going to go down, pop, look to play, hit midfield, and either kick out one side or then look to play the opposite side. So your preparation is different, but then you play a South African side, they're probably more like the Australian, the English, because they're bigger guys. They're going to maul it out of their own zone and then box kick. And so the preparation mentally was a little bit different in Super Rugby, I found, because each team, particularly if you played different countries each week, you'd have to prepare almost a different game plan for what you were going to expect from the opposition. Whereas, particularly in the Premiership, I don't think there weren't too many teams that would do a huge amount different, particularly now with these sort of systems that a lot of the teams run, with pods and so forth.
So obviously, since retiring, you've gone to Cambridge, and then you played in the varsity fixture in December. And you
Yep.
and Van der Merwe created the most experienced Cambridge second row of all time. I think it was 99 international caps between you. We're just
Yeah.
wondering the difference between professional rugby and then going down a level to Cambridge, Oxford. How different was it?
Oh, it's very different. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I probably Flip and I brought the average age up. Probably doubled the average age, just the two of us. So look, it was interesting. It sort of reminded me of when I started playing. I left high school and went and played for my university side back in Queensland. So I played for the University of Queensland, and that was my club side, alongside playing at the Reds, and that it sort of reminded me a little bit of the first year I had out of school when I was at uni, and boys want to go out pretty much every night of the week. I probably couldn't do that. Now that I've got a wife and a young daughter, so that your priorities change. But it's certainly, you saw shades of what I used to do. When I was 18, first left school, and you're playing for fun. And look, it's a big moment for a lot of the guys that played, and I think that was the thing that struck me. This is a big opportunity, big chance, and a big for a lot of them, and for most of them, the highest, the biggest, the pinnacle of their sporting life is going to be this game. And there's a lot of pressure put on it. So, I guess I tried to work a little bit to calm them all down a bit. It's that, they put so much pressure on themselves for this one game about how it's going to, the be all and end all, and it's going to be remembered forever. And I think it's, it probably became a little bit too not conducive to performing well at a high level. And I think it was, I guess, the element where Flip and I probably came in was probably trying to be a bit more of a calming influence over the whole thing, and not to put too much pressure on yourselves, and just go out and play. And we had some great young players and guys that that could have a big future in the game. And you're tying that with what is a fairly hectic academic schedule. It's a bit of a hectic time, particularly for the undergrads. As a postgrad, we had a little bit more space, but the undergrads, the timing that they have, and they certainly enjoy themselves like every other uni team I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I guess moving on, so talking about sort of rugby in Australia at the moment. So I guess there was what do you think went wrong in the recent World Cup in 2019 with Australia getting knocked out in quarters?
Look, I think there seemed to be, I'm not close enough to understand exactly what happened, but look, I think there was just some elements of that we sort of struggled to get going a little bit. There looked to be guys were a little bit confused and disjointed with the way we were playing. I think there was probably an opportunity to refresh the squad a little bit earlier. And we just had probably stagnated a little bit as a team moving forward. We'd sort of not progressed as much as your teams like your Wales and your England had probably progressed. Even South Africa is the perfect example. A couple of years earlier, everyone was calling for Russ's head, and they'd worked out a way to progress and improve, and gradually I don't think we'd sort of seen that same consistent improvement. We played good games, we beat the All Blacks for the first time in a long time, and in what was probably one of the most dominant performances we'd seen in a long time from an Australian team. And look, I think we just didn't see that consistently enough. That was the issue. And at a World Cup, you got to be consistent.
So how big an impact do you think that off the field instance? Because obviously behind the scenes Australian rugby, you've got the Izzy Folau incident. He was one of your best players, and potentially one of Australia's greatest players. You had the Raylene Castle resignation. It's all behind the scenes, just adding up.
Yeah, look, I think, obviously the Izzy thing was a distraction. I can't speak of what it was like for the guys in the squad, but obviously it took up a lot of external communications, conversations from the media, and anytime anyone did anything, they were asked about it, and you'd have to be kidding yourself if you didn't think it was a distraction to that element. Internally it probably wasn't. I can't, as I said, I'm not sure about whether it divided anyone in the squad. I'm not sure. So look, it's and now that it's moving forward with the COVID crisis, and with the resignation of Raylene, and we're getting a new chairman. I think it's probably the perfect time for a reset button to be hit for Australian rugby. Probably the first and only time that we have an opportunity to do something different without upsetting too many partners, just because of the restrictions put on playing and travel. And you're going to get a chairman and a new coach is coming in and a new CEO when appointed. It's probably the first time I can remember where all of them have come in at the same time. So this is a clean slate. There's no one that's come from a previous or employed them. They're all coming in at the same time, basically the same time, and in the same year to start the process of building. And it's a huge opportunity for whoever gets the role of the CEO to put something in place that's sustainable and moving forward. And that's I imagine that would be enticing for a lot of sports administrators around the world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a lot of potential? Because I guess the under-20s did very well. The under-18s, I guess the coaches that just came in are really, I guess, high caliber, like Dave Rennie and Scott Wisemantel and so on. Do you think they could become a dominant force again if it all goes well?
I think so. I think there's a lot of excitement about some of our youngsters. I think we need to be careful not putting too much pressure on them early on. There's certainly a good crop, and obviously we've been, as you mentioned, been quite successful at an underage level, and I mean that doesn't always transfer to a senior level. But if we can transfer some of the players onto a national and get them performing at that level at an international stage, there's no reason why we can't be successful. I think a lot of people now are judged, on your 4-year cycles. Basically, it depends on what happens, for the next World Cup. That's going to be the big challenge for Australia. Dave Rennie, I've never been coached by him, but he's from everything I hear, he's there's a lot of very good reports. I've been coached by Scott Wisemantel, Matt Taylor, who's the defensive coach, both excellent coaches in their own right. The S&C staff that they've got is as good as I've ever seen. I think it's probably the most, across the board, the strongest coaching group, going from head coach through to even to your S&C, that the Wallabies have had. There are no weak points, and so it's exciting that what they can do with the young talent that we've got in the country. And I hope, from my point of view, watching, I'm very excited about the next few years. It might not happen this year, and probably there won't be too many games in COVID, but next year or the year after is when I think we'll see the real proof of what's happening, and ultimately at the World Cup in France in 2023.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time, I think, for Australia. So one thing we do for every podcast is we ask whoever we've got on for their favourite moment in their career. If you had to pick like one moment which you wouldn't change for anything, what would it be?
It would be winning the Super Rugby title with the Reds, purely just because I'd been sort of through the bad times, and we got pretty bad. We were pretty low, and to be part of a full rebuild, and I guess to get to the top and to the pinnacle where we were when, probably even a year or 2 years earlier, people wouldn't even think, we were the laughing stock of Super Rugby. We were the laughing stock of Queensland sport. No one wanted to wear their Reds jersey around town. No one wanted to be part of us. And, the fact to be able to not only win it, but build that faith and belief and passion back for the team was something that, and to be able to play it at Suncorp Stadium, which was our home stadium after what the state had been through. We'd been through floods, not too far earlier that year, and a lot of people had been through a lot of devastation. To do it there, and what was a record crowd at the stadium at the time, it was a huge occasion, and something that I'll always remember and cherish quite fondly. Yeah,
great. Well, James, thank you so much. It's been it's been amazing for me and Matt, and I'm sure everyone who's going to listen to this is going to love it as well.
Perfect. Pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone else, for coming and listening. We hope that you've enjoyed this, and remember to keep following our Instagram. We'll put sneak peeks for next week's episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you very soon.